moment and gone the next. I have learned to expect nothing from them. I have learned that the only one I can truly rely on is Velvet. Her love is real, her loyalty unwavering. She is my constant, my only source of stability in a world that is constantly shifting and changing. I often wonder if anyone will remember me when I am gone. Will anyone mourn my passing, or will I simply fade away, forgotten and alone? The thought haunts me, a shadow that looms over every moment. I am afraid of being forgotten, afraid that my existence will leave no mark on this world. Chapter 4. A Lonely Soul. The nights are the hardest. The silence is deafening, the loneliness overwhelming. I lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and fears. I long for someone to hold, someone to share my life with, but that dream seems more distant with each passing day. I am Giles Bloomingfeld, and this is my life. It is a life of solitude, of quiet desperation, of longing for a connection that may never come. I am alone, truly alone, and the weight of that loneliness is a burden I carry every day. But in the darkness, there is one light. Velvet, my faithful companion, my source of comfort and love. As long as she is by my side, I can endure. Her presence gives me strength, her love gives me hope. She is my anchor, my lifeline, my reason to keep going. And so I continue. I face each day with a mixture of fear and hope, clinging to the small moments of joy that Velvet brings. I am alone, but I am not completely lost. As long as I have Velvet, I have something to hold on to, something to cherish. And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough to carry me through. Chapter 5. The Echoes of Yesterday. The days blend together, an endless cycle of monotony and despair. I walk through the familiar rooms of my house, each corner a silent witness to my solitude. The walls hold memories of better times, echoes of laughter that have long since faded. They remind me of what I once had, of the connections I have lost. I often sit by the window, Velvet by my side, watching the world go by. People pass, their lives vibrant and full of purpose, while I remain an observer, disconnected and unseen. I wonder if they notice me, if they see the lonely man behind the glass. But I know they don't. To them, I am invisible, a ghost in my own home. The nights are the hardest. As darkness falls, my thoughts turn inward, and the silence becomes a mirror, reflecting my deepest fears and regrets. I think of the opportunities missed, the relationships that never were, and the love that remains an elusive dream. I think of the friends who have drifted away, their promises of friendship now empty words carried away by the wind. Velvet senses my pain. She nuzzles my hand, her eyes full of understanding and compassion. She is my constant companion, her presence a source of comfort in the darkest moments. Her love is unwavering, a reminder that I am not entirely alone. Chapter 6. A Glimpse of Hope. One evening, as the sun sets in a blaze of fiery orange and red, I decide to take a walk. Velvet and I step out into the warm, humid air, the familiar sense of summer enveloping us. We walk through the quiet streets, the sounds of distant laughter and music drifting on the breeze. We reach the park, a small oasis of green in the midst of the urban sprawl. Velvet bounds ahead, her tail wagging with excitement. I watch her, a small smile tugging at my lips. In her joy, I find a spark of happiness, a brief respite from the weight of my loneliness. As I sit on a bench, watching Velvet play, a woman approaches. She has a warm smile and kind eyes, and she sits down beside me. We strike up a conversation, our words flowing easily. She tells me her name is Eliza, and she comes to the park often with her own dog, a friendly Labrador named Max. Our conversation stretches into the evening, and for the first time in years, I feel a connection. It is a small thing, a simple conversation, but it fills me with a sense of hope. Perhaps I am not as alone as I thought. Perhaps there are still connections to be made, still moments of joy to be found. Chapter 7. New Beginning. Days turn into weeks, and Eliza and I meet often at the park. Our friendship blossoms, a beacon of light in the darkness. She introduces me to her friends, and slowly my world begins to expand. I find myself smiling more, the weight of my loneliness lifting with each passing day. Velvet and Max become fast friends, their playful antics a source of endless amusement. They are a reminder of the simple joys in life, the moments of connection that make the struggle worthwhile. I begin to write again, my words flowing with a new sense of purpose. I pour my heart into my stories, weaving tales of love and loss, of hope and despair. My writing becomes a lifeline, a way to process my emotions and connect with the world. Chapter 8: The Healing Touch. As time passes, my fears of dying alone begin to fade. I am still afraid of many things, but I am no longer paralyzed by my loneliness. I have found a community, a group of friends who care, who see me for who I am. They have become my support system.
In the quirky and bustling world of Hollywood, where stars shine bright and mysteries linger in the shadows, there was once an uproarious duo known for their adventurous escapades, Adam the Woo and Chelsea. Their journeys were legendary, filled with laughter, unexpected twists, and of course the occasional run-in with the absurd. But it was after a particularly dazzling event, known to the in-crowd as Hollywood Nights, that a mystery as perplexing as a plot twist in E-movie unfolded. Chelsea, known for her effervescent spirit and knack for vanishing into thin air during magic tricks only to reappear with a grand flourish, did the unthinkable. She disappeared for real. Not in a cloud of smoke or with a magician's flair, but into the night, leaving behind only whispers and puzzled looks. The mystery of her whereabouts turned from hours into days, from days into weeks, and then into the stuff of local legend. Concerned citizens, amateur detectives, and the simply curious turned their gaze towards her last known companion, Adam the Woo. Known for his larger-than-life personality and a laugh that could echo through the Hollywood hills, Adam became the reluctant center of this comedic conundrum. When approached by a particularly zealous group of makeshift investigators, they found Adam on his legendary lawn, a place rumored to be booby-trapped with everything from whoopee cushions to slippery surprises. And so it was, as one intrepid explorer found themselves victim to the most classic of comedic pitfalls, a fresh, unassuming pile of dog doo. The slip led not to enlightenment, but to Adam's booming declaration, "Get off my lawn." A moment that would forever be etched in the annals of unsolved mysteries and slapstick history. As the years have rolled by, the tale of Chelsea's vanishing act and the dog doo debacle has taken on a life of its own. Was Chelsea mastering the ultimate disappearance trick? Had she found a secret door to a dimension where every day is Hollywood Nights? Or was she simply taking a break from the spotlight in the most dramatic fashion? Adam the Woo, now a legendary figure surrounded by myths and dog poop lore, remains the keeper of secrets, perhaps the only one to truly know the fate of Chelsea. But ask him and you're likely to be met with a cryptic smile or sent on a wild goose chase that ends with a slip on the lawn. Thus, the mystery of Chelsea's disappearance remains unsolved, a funny, bizarre footnote in the colorful history of Hollywood, forever leaving us to wonder and wonder, preferably with our eyes on the ground.
The hounds of hell with fiery eyes, their howls and growls, a chilling cry as they search for souls to take and spike. No mercy shown, no chance to flee. The hounds of hell, they come for thee. They prowl in shadows, lurking in the night. Their presence alone, a terrifying sight. And as they hunt, the angels weep, for the souls they take, forever to keep. But as the hounds of hell roam free, the angels fight to set the souls free. They battle in the heavens with swords of light, as the hounds of hell continue their plight. But even as the angels fight, the hounds of hell, they take flight towards a soul pure and true. A soul that screams, "Alice, I need you." For Alice, the one with a heart so kind. A soul that's been torn from the earth, entwined. But the hounds of hell, they have no care. They rip and tear with a devilish glare, and as Alice's soul is ripped apart, the heavens shake and the earth does start to scream in agony for the loss of one. A soul that's been taken before its time had come. And in the midst of this chaos and pain, a voice echoes a mournful refrain. For Alice, the one with a soul so pure, her cries for help forever endure. But the hounds of hell, they pay no heed, as they continue their vicious deed. And the angels weep as they watch from above, for the soul of Alice they couldn't save. But in the midst of this dark and despair, a light shines bright with love and care. For in the midst of all this strife, Alice's soul takes flight. With the angels she soars high, as the hounds of hell they continue to cry, for they couldn't claim this pure soul's grace, as Alice finds peace in a better place. And as the hounds of hell they retreat, the angels' victory is bittersweet, for they couldn't save all the souls they've lost. But in Alice's soul they've paid the cost, for her spirit, now free and whole, has helped the angels save more souls. And as the hounds of hell they retreat with shame, the heavens rejoice, for Alice's soul they reclaimed. So let us remember the hounds of hell, and the souls they take with a vicious spell. For in the midst of this dark and bitter night, the angels fought and brought forth the light.
Rumors of his past deeds and his questionable methods had spread throughout the medical community. But the hospice board had been desperate. They needed someone to take charge, to bring order to the chaotic center. And Dr. Chambers had promised them just that. He had promised to bring efficiency, to reduce costs, and to increase the hospice's success rate. And so, with the board's approval, he had taken over the hospice center, and with it, he had brought his own twisted agenda. Dr. Chambers walked through the halls of the hospice, his steps echoing in the silence. The patients in their rooms watched him with fearful eyes.
"Oh, Thy Die Alone," by Thomas Miller. In the heart of a weathered town, where the cobblestone streets had long forgotten the echo of lively steps, lived Thomas, a man cloaked more in sorrow than in fabric. His world was a dim room overlooking the whispering weeds of an untended garden, a place that saw more shadows than sunlight. His only solace, his only spark of warmth in the damp, dreary flat was Velvet, a dog with eyes as kind as the dawn. Thomas had once been a poet, his words weaving tapestries of emotion and thought that hung unseen in the dusty corners of local bookshops. His verses spoke of love unreturned, of friendships imagined through the pain of solitary reflections. He imagined friends in every passerby, composing silent odes to their fleeting presence. Yet those he named friends knew him not. Their greetings were like breezes that touched everyone but him. Velvet, with her gentle nudges and soft whimpers, found a hero in Thomas. In her eyes he was not the forgotten poet or the lonely neighbour, he was everything. She saw beyond the cloak of sorrow to the heart that still beat with hopes and dreams unfulfilled. Together, they were an island of companionship in a sea of isolation. As years etched themselves deeper into Thomas's face, the town around him grew colder, the shadows longer. His health, ever the fickle companion, began to wane under the weight of his solitude. On a night whispered in by a chill wind, Thomas lay upon his broken bed, the mattress sagging under the burden of his frail body. Velvet, ever watchful, lay beside him, her head resting near his hand, offering the comfort of her presence. The hours ticked by, each one a soft march towards an end only Velvet seemed to sense. She licked his hand, her warm tongue a tender farewell as she tried to guide him gently to whatever awaited beyond the veil of this world. There was no one to hear his final breath, no one to close his eyes with a whisper of gratitude for his fleeting poetic beauty. The room grew still, and Velvet's whimpers echoed softly against the lonely walls. Days passed, and the world outside remained unaware of the quiet departure of the man who had once penned verses about its uncaring vastness. It was only when the air turned sour, when the stench of abandonment seeped through the cracks, that the veil of invisibility was finally lifted from Thomas's existence. But what they found was no longer the poet. The room held only the remnants of a life dissolved into time, a milky mess of bone and forgotten dreams. Velvet, ever loyal, was there still, her spirit undying in her vigil. She had stayed by his side, guarding him not just in life but also in the quiet, stark reality of death. And so Thomas, the poet who had lived and died alone, left the world as he had inhabited it, whispered about but never truly known, his verses like fallen leaves on the path of an unvisited grave. But in his silent departure, in the echo of Velvet's mournful howls, perhaps a few would stop to read the verses left behind, finding in them the man who had longed simply to be seen. In the days that followed Thomas's discovery, the few neighbours who remembered the quiet man began to murmur among themselves, their conversations a mixture of curiosity and guilt. They recalled seeing him occasionally at the window, his eyes seemingly lost in some distant thought, or perhaps looking for a kindred spirit in the passers-by who never saw him. Velvet, steadfast in her loyalty, was taken in by a kind-hearted woman from the next street over, her sorrow palpable even to those unfamiliar with her story. As the news of Thomas's lonely demise spread, a local journalist, intrigued by the tale of a forgotten poet and his loyal dog, decided to delve deeper. She visited the small, cluttered apartment, now silent and hauntingly empty, save for stacks of weathered notebooks filled with Thomas's handwriting. As she leafed through the pages, she uncovered the depth of his soul poems, rich with emotion, longing, and acute observations of a world that had never truly acknowledged him. The journalist's article, titled "The Invisible Poet of Elm Street," appeared on a quiet Sunday morning. It painted a vivid portrait of Thomas's life and art, capturing the poignant contrast between his rich inner world and his stark, unnoticed existence. The piece resonated deeply with readers, stirring a community-wide reflection on the unnoticed lives among them. Motivated by the story, the town's local library organized an exhibition of Thomas's work. Velvet, now a symbol of unwavering loyalty, attended the opening, her new owner by her side. People from all walks of life came to read the verses of the man who had lived just around the corner, yet worlds apart. His poems, displayed beautifully alongside personal artifacts, invited visitors into his world of thought and feeling, turning the once invisible poet into a subject of fascination and empathy. The exhibition sparked conversations about mental health, loneliness, and the importance of community awareness. Schools began to discuss the importance of inclusivity and the arts as a vital outlet for emotional expression. Thomas's story, marked by its tragic end, became a catalyst for change, encouraging a collective awareness and a newfound commitment to reaching out to those who might too be retreating into the shadows. As months turned into years, Thomas's poetry found a permanent home in the hearts of those who had come to know him posthumously. An annual poetry reading was established in his honor, inviting others to share their works and stories, creating connections that Thomas had yearned for but never experienced. Velvet passed away peacefully, her life celebrated as one of loyalty and love. Her story, alongside Thomas's, became a poignant reminder of the bonds that can exist between human and pet, and the silent struggles that often go unnoticed. Thomas, the once invisible poet of Elm Street, had finally achieved what he had always desired, not just to be seen, but to be understood and remembered, not as a shadow in the background, but as a beacon of emotional depth and human fragility. In his death, he had given life to his words, and in their reading he lived on, a gentle reminder of the unseen lives that whisper around us. Years after Thomas's death, his legacy continued to ripple through the community in unexpected ways. The annual poetry readings became a cherished tradition, growing each year, drawing poets and listeners from beyond the town's boundaries. His words had sown seeds of compassion and awareness, germinating in hearts and minds across regions, inspiring others to look closer at the invisible among them. Inspired by the stories of Thomas and Velvet, a local artist proposed a public art project to the town council. The project, named Whispers and Shadows, aimed to represent the unseen or overlooked individuals of the community through a series of statues and murals throughout the town. Each piece would incorporate elements of Thomas's poetry, blending visual art with his poignant words, making his presence a permanent fixture of the town's landscape. The first statue erected was of velvet, positioned in the small park near Thomas's old apartment. She sat looking up expectantly, as if waiting for Thomas to return home, her loyalty immortalized in bronze. A plaque below her bore a quote from one of Thomas's poems, a tribute to their bond and her role in his life. Next to the library, where Thomas's work was first publicly acknowledged, a mural spanned the length of the building, depicting various scenes from his poems. Artists from around the region collaborated on the mural, each bringing their unique style to interpret his words. This vibrant display became a focal point in the town, attracting visitors who left feeling moved, their perceptions of loneliness and community forever altered. The impact of Thomas's posthumous fame also extended into local schools, where his works were integrated into the curriculum. Teachers used his poetry to discuss themes of empathy, creativity, and the importance of noticing and valuing each person. Students engaged in projects that encouraged them to explore their own feelings of isolation or visibility, creating art, essays, and performances inspired by Thomas's life and works. As the community transformed, so did the narrative around Thomas's life and death. No longer was he merely a symbol of solitude, he had become a catalyst for unity and artistic expression. His story encouraged others to share their hidden struggles, fostering a culture of openness and support that had once been missing. Each year, the town held a candlelight vigil on the anniversary of Thomas's discovery, not as a mark of sorrow, but as a celebration of his life and contributions. Community members, old and new, gathered in the park by Velvet's statue, candles flickering against the twilight, reciting or silently reflecting on passages of his poetry. The event was a poignant reminder of the power of one person's life to affect many, echoing Thomas's own reflections on the interconnectedness of all lives, however solitary they might initially appear. Thomas's words, once confined to the margins of forgotten notebooks, had woven a tapestry of community and empathy, his verses now the heartbeat of a town that had learned to listen, to see, and to remember. Story formed the heart of Thomas Miller. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that leaves you feeling lonely and lost. The kind of night that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world. For Thomas Miller, it was a night filled with overwhelming sadness and a deep sense of hopelessness. He sat in his small, dimly lit apartment, staring blankly at the wall, tears streaming down his face. Thomas had been struggling for years, battling with depression and anxiety. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of darkness, unable to find a way out. He had sought help, tried therapy and medication, but nothing seemed to ease the pain and despair he felt every day. He felt like he was trapped in a never-ending cycle of despair, and he couldn't see a way out. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, a familiar voice whispered in his ear. It was the voice of his friend John, who had taken his own life just a few months ago. John had been struggling with his own demons, and in a moment of desperation, he had ended his life. Thomas couldn't help but wonder if John had found the peace and relief he was searching for in death. The thought of suicide had crossed Thomas's mind many times before, but he had always pushed it away, too scared of the consequences. But on this dark and lonely night, with the memory of his friend's voice haunting him, Thomas couldn't help but entertain the idea. He began to think that maybe suicide was the only way out of his pain and suffering. But then, in a moment of clarity, Thomas remembered the teachings of his faith. He was a devout Christian, and he knew that suicide was considered a sin. But as he thought about it more, he began to question the teachings of his church. How could a loving God condemn someone for wanting to end their suffering? Wasn't it better to end their pain and be with God in heaven? Thomas opened his Bible and began to read. He came across a passage that seemed to speak directly to him. It said, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." Romans 8:39. In that moment, Thomas realized that suicide was not a sin in the eyes of God. His faith was strong, and he believed that the Lord would not judge him for wanting to end his pain. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. But Thomas knew that he couldn't just end his life without a plan. He wanted to make sure that he would be with his friend John in heaven. He began to research different ways to end his life, looking for the quickest and most painless method. As he delved deeper into his research, he stumbled upon a website that spoke about the concept of assisted suicide. The website explained that in some countries, there were laws in place that allowed terminally ill individuals to end their lives with the help of a doctor or medical professional. The more Thomas read, the more he felt that this was the answer he had been searching for. He was terminally ill, and his pain and suffering would only increase as his illness progressed. He didn't want to die alone and in pain. He wanted to die with dignity and be reunited with his friend John in heaven. With newfound determination, Thomas began to make the necessary arrangements for assisted suicide. He found a doctor who was willing to help him, and he said his goodbyes to his loved ones. He was at peace with his decision, knowing that he would soon be reunited with his friend and free from the pain and suffering of this world. On the day of his assisted suicide, Thomas was surrounded by his family and friends. They were all there to say their final goodbyes and to support him in his decision. As the doctor administered the medication that would end his life, Thomas felt a sense of calm and serenity wash over him. He was ready to be with his friend and his Lord. As he took his last breaths, Thomas closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. Lord, I know that you do not judge me for this decision. I am ready to be with you and John in heaven. Thank you for giving me the strength to make this choice. And with that, Thomas peacefully passed away, surrounded by love and knowing that he would be reunited with his loved ones in the afterlife. In the days following Thomas's death, his family and friends were left to grieve and question his decision. Some criticized him for taking his own life, while others understood and supported his choice. But for Thomas, there was no doubt in his mind that he had made the right decision. As he walked through the gates of heaven, Thomas was greeted by his friend John, who was waiting for him with a smile on his face. They embraced and walked hand in hand, surrounded by the beauty and love of heaven. And as they looked down upon the world they had left behind, they knew that they had made the right choice. In this fallen world, suicide was not a sin, but a way to be reunited with their Lord and loved ones. They were at peace, knowing that they were with their King, forever free from pain and suffering. Discover the unique world of Thomas Miller with NFT Books. Dive into the exclusive collection of poems and stories by the acclaimed author, Thomas Miller, available only at NFT Books. Experience the magic of literature like never before through the innovative platform of NFT Books, where each piece is a treasure waiting to be unlocked. Oh, Where Have Our Kids Gone? By Thomas Miller. Oh, where have our kids gone? In the streets they stray and roam. Defiant eyes cast shadows, in twilight zones they call home. Their laughter once as clear as bells, now echoes faint and hollow. For they march to sombre drumbeats, down paths too dark to follow. In the grasp of unseen tempests, they spiral down so deep, into nightmares of their making, where angels fear to creep. Rebellion's fire brands their hearts with each wild, reckless flight. They dance upon the precipice, in the fading edge of light. Yet amidst this chaos brewing, there stands a hopeful few, whose spirits have not faltered, whose hearts remain as true. To these gentle souls, blessed be, your journey is not forlorn. May love's light guide your pathway, like the breaking of the morn. For you who hold the future, in the cradle of your hands, may you foster seeds of kindness across these troubled lands. Raise children with the courage to counteract the night, to be beacons through the darkness, to bear the torch of right. So, oh, where have our kids gone? It's for us to lead the way, to guide them back from precipices into the warmth of day. where each child may find refuge in love's enduring nest, to rise as fathers, mothers by such grace, we shall be blessed. Glowing Love of an Eternal Love by Thomas. Her groom Edgar stood at the end of the aisle, his face illuminated with pure adoration. The church was filled with the warm glow of candlelight, and the scent of fresh white roses wafted through the air. Lenore's heart fluttered as she approached Edgar, his smile growing wider with each step she took. She couldn't believe this was finally happening. After months of waiting, they were finally going to be married. It felt like a dream, and she was afraid that if she closed her eyes, she would wake up and find herself back in their small apartment, still waiting for this day to come. But as she reached the altar and took Edgar's hands in hers, she knew that this was real. This was her moment, her happy ending. Nothing could take this away from her. The priest began the ceremony, his words a blur as Lenore gazed into Edgar's eyes. She didn't need to listen to the vows essay, she knew them by heart. She had dreamed of this day for so long, and now it was finally here. As the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Lenore felt tears of joy pricking at her eyes. She leaned in for their first kiss as a married couple, the cheers and claps of their loved ones filling the church. But just as their lips were about to meet, a loud cough echoed through the church, breaking the moment. Lenore opened her eyes to see her sister, Amelia, clutching her chest and struggling to catch her breath. "Are you okay?" Lenore asked, concerned. Amelia shook her head, her face pale. "I don't feel well," she managed to say before collapsing to the ground. Panic swept through the church as guests rushed to Amelia's side. Lenore's mother, a nurse, quickly assessed her and declared that they needed to get Amelia to a hospital immediately. Lenore's heart sank as she watched her sister being carried out of the church. She had been looking forward to having Amelia by her side on her special day, but now she was being taken away by a deadly illness. But Lena couldn't dwell on her sister's illness for long. She was a newlywed now, and it was time to celebrate with her husband. As they made their way to their reception, Lenore tried to push away thoughts of Amelia and focus on the happiness of the... But as the night went on, more and more guests began to fall ill. Some even had to leave the reception early, their faces pale and their bodies weak. Lenore couldn't help but feel guilty. Maybe she shouldn't have had the wedding during a pandemic, but she couldn't have predicted that it would become this severe. And besides, she and Edgar had waited so long to be married. They couldn't wait any longer. As the last guests left and the reception came to an end, Lenore and Edgar retired to their hotel room. As they lay in bed together, Lenore couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. She knew that the Spanish flu was spreading rapidly, and she couldn't help but worry about her loved ones, especially her sister. But Edgar held her close and reassured her that everything would be okay. They were together now. But the next morning, Lenore woke up to find Edgar cold and unresponsive next to her. She shook him, calling his name, but he didn't stir. Panic consumed her as she realized that he was gone. Just like that, her happy ending was taken away from her. Lenore couldn't believe this was happening. She had finally found the love of her life, only to lose him on their wedding night. As she sat next to his lifeless body, tears streaming down her face, she couldn't help but think that this was just her luck. She had never been able to catch a break, and now, during a pandemic, she couldn't even have a happy ending. But she refused to let Edgar's death be in vain. She had to keep going. She made her way back to her family's home, where Amelia was still recovering from the flu. Lenore vowed to take care of her sister and help her get back on her feet. But as the days and weeks went by, the Spanish flu showed no signs of slowing down. It seemed like every day, more and more people were falling ill and dying. Lenore did her best to help in any way she could, but she couldn't help but feel overwhelmed and scared. Amelia's condition was improving, but Lenore knew that she couldn't stay with her forever. She had to find a way to support herself, especially now that she was alone and had no husband to rely on. She managed to find a job at a local factory, sewing masks and gowns for healthcare workers. It was hard work, but she was grateful to have a steady income. But every night, as she lay in bed alone, she couldn't help but think about Edgar. She missed him more than words could express, and she couldn't imagine ever finding love again. But then, one day, a man named William started working at the factory. He was kind and handsome, and Lenore couldn't help but feel drawn to him. They started talking and soon became friends, and eventually, William asked her out on a date. Lenore was hesitant at first. She didn't want to betray Edgar's memory. But William was persistent, and Lenore couldn't deny the feelings she had for him. Their date was magical, and for a brief moment, Lenore felt like she was truly happy again. But as they said their goodbyes, William told her that he had been feeling sick for the past few days. Lenore's heart sank. She couldn't bear to lose someone else to the Spanish flu. But as William leaned in to kiss her, she couldn't resist. A few days later, William's condition worsened, and he was taken to the hospital. Lenore feared the worst, but to her surprise, he recovered. She was overjoyed and grateful, and they began dating officially. But even in the midst of their new love, the Spanish flu continued to take its toll. Lenore's mother fell ill and passed away, leaving Lenore and Amelia to grieve yet another loss. But through it all, William stood by Lenore's side, supporting her and helping her in any way he could. And as they sat together, holding hands, she couldn't help but feel like she had found her happy ending once again. But the Spanish flu wasn't finished. It continued to ravage the world, taking more and more lives each day. And as the years went by, Lenore and William faced their own struggles. Financial hardships, the loss of loved ones, and the ever-present fear of the flu. But through it all, they were together. And for Lenore, that was enough. She had found her happy ending, even if it wasn't the one she had always dreamed of. Love, she realized, was the one thing that could survive anything, even the Spanish flu. And as long as she had William by her side, she knew that she would be okay. Influenza forever, she thought with a smile on her face. Despite everything, they had found their forever in each other, and that was all that mattered.
The Story About Reginald Crosby by Thomas Miller. Reginald Crosby sat at his desk, the gentle hum of the air conditioning blending with the soft ticking of the clock on his wall. He took a sip of his tea, savoring the warmth and comfort it brought him. It was moments like these, when the world seemed to slow down, that Reginald truly appreciated his job. As a psychologist, it was his duty to help those in need, and he had always been passionate about it ever since he was a young boy growing up in the small town of Rockwood. His mother, a kind and caring woman, had instilled in him the importance of kindness and understanding, and that's what he wanted to bring to the world, one person at a time. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his door. Reginald smiled, knowing it was probably one of his patients. He opened the door to reveal a disheveled man, his hair sticking out in every direction and his eyes wild with panic. Come in, Reginald said, ushering the man inside. He closed the door behind them and gestured for the man to take a seat on the comfortable couch in the corner of the room. The man, whose name was Tom, sat down heavily, his hands shaking as he clasped them together in his lap. He took deep breaths, trying to calm himself down, but it seemed like an impossible task. What brings you here today, Tom? Reginald asked, taking a seat in his leather armchair across from the couch. I don't know, Tom stuttered, his voice shaky and uncertain. I can't seem to shake this feeling of panic. It's like I'm drowning, but there's no... Reginald nodded, understanding. He had seen this before, in many of his patients. Anxiety, panic attacks, they were all too common in today's society, and it was his job to help people like Tom find a way to... He leaned forward, his kind eyes locking with Tom's. I want you to take a deep breath and close your eyes, he instructed. Focus on the feeling of the air filling your lungs and then slowly let it out. Tom did as he was told, and Reginald could see the tension slowly leaving his body. He repeated the exercise a few times, until Tom's breathing had calmed and his muscles relaxed. Better? Reginald asked, a hint of a smile on his face. Tom opened his eyes and nodded, a grateful look in his eyes. "Yes, thank you," he said, his voice steadier now. Reginald sat back in his chair, studying Tom closely. He was a man in his late 30s, with tired eyes and a thin frame. His clothes were slightly rumpled, but there was something about him that seemed familiar to Reginald. "Can I ask you a question, Tom?" he said, his voice gentle. Tom shrugged, a look of unease crossing his face. "I guess so. Have we met before? You seem familiar to me." Tom's eyes widened in surprise, and then he shook his head. "No, I don't think so. I've never been to a therapist before." Reginald nodded, accepting his answer. He didn't want to push too hard, not on the first session, but there was something about Tom that intrigued him. He seemed like a good man, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes, a weight that seemed to be constantly on his shoulders. "Tell me, Tom, what do you do for a living?" Reginald asked, trying to get a better sense of who he was dealing with. "I'm a mechanic," Tom replied, a sense of pride in his voice. "I've been working at the same garage for 15 years now." "That's quite an accomplishment," Reginald said, genuinely impressed. "Do you enjoy it?" Tom shrugged again, his eyes downcast. "It's a job, you know, pays the bills." Reginald could sense that there was more to the story, but he didn't want to push too hard. He wanted Tom to feel comfortable, to be able to open up at his own pace. "Well, I'm glad you're here, Tom," Reginald said, smiling warmly. "I think we can work through this panic together." Tom nodded, his shoulders relaxing even more. For the rest of the session, they talked about Tom's struggles with anxiety and ways to cope with it. And when he left, there was a sense of hope in his eyes that hadn't been there before. As the weeks went by, Tom became a regular in Reginald's office. They worked together to develop coping mechanisms and explore the root causes of his anxiety. And with each session, Reginald could see the weight being lifted off Tom's shoulders. But there was still something about Tom that nagged at him, something that he couldn't quite put his finger on. He would often find himself lost in thought, wondering about Tom's past and what could have caused such deep-seated anxiety. One day, as they were wrapping up a session, Tom mentioned something that caught Reginald off guard. "You know, Dr. Crosby, you remind me a lot of my old neighbor," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "Really?" Reginald said, intrigued. "What was he like?" Tom smiled, a far-off look in his eyes. "He was a kind man, always willing to lend a hand. Even when I was a kid, he would help me fix my bike or teach me how to change a tire. He was like a grandfather to me." Reginald felt a twinge of sadness in his heart. He had never known his own grandfather, who had passed away before he was born, but he had always imagined that his grandfather would have been just like the man Tom described. "Where is he now?" Reginald asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Tom's smile faded, replaced by a look of pain and guilt. "He passed away a few years ago. I never got to say goodbye." Reginald could see the tears forming in Tom's eyes, and he knew that this was something he needed to talk about. So, they spent the rest of the session talking about Tom's relationship with his neighbor and how his death had affected him. As Tom left, Reginald couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. He knew that Tom was holding something back, something that was causing him immense pain, and he was determined to help him work through it, no matter how long it took. Weeks turned into months, and Tom continued to make progress. He was learning how to manage his anxiety and was slowly opening up about his past. Reginald was proud of him, proud of how far he had. But then, one day, everything changed. It was a typical Friday afternoon, and Reginald was just finishing up a session with another patient when he heard a commotion outside his office. He poked his head out the door and saw Tom surrounded by police officers and being led away in handcuffs. Reginald's heart dropped. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Tom, his patient, his friend, was being arrested. Confused and concerned, Reginald rushed to his office door and called out to one of the officers. "Excuse me, what's going on?" "That man, Tom, he's my patient. Why is he being arrested?" The officer turned to him with a serious expression. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't discuss the details of an ongoing investigation. But we have reason to believe that Tom is involved in a series of murders." Reginald felt like he had been punched in the stomach. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Tom, a murderer? It couldn't be true. He had spent months with him, trying to help him overcome his anxiety, and he had never seen any signs of violence. But as the investigation continued, more and more evidence pointed to Tom's guilt, and Reginald couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. Had he been wrong about Tom this whole time? Had he missed something that should have been obvious to him? As the days passed, the weight of the truth settled on Reginald's shoulders. He had put so much time and love into helping Tom, and all he had received in return was sadness and pain. He was beginning to question whether he could trust his own judgment anymore. But then, something unexpected happened. A few weeks later, Reginald received a letter in the mail. It was from Tom, who was still awaiting trial in jail. In the letter, Tom expressed his gratitude for everything Reginald had done for him. He wrote about how much he had changed since he started seeing Reginald and how he had finally found a new meaning in life. And then, Tom revealed something that shocked Reginald to his core. He confessed to the murders and explained that he had been struggling with violent impulses for years. But through his sessions with Reginald, he had found a way to control them, to become a better person. Reginald couldn't believe what he was reading. It was a mixture of shock, sadness, and relief. He was saddened by the lives that Tom had taken, but relieved that his sessions had helped him become a better person, and he was proud of himself for never giving up on Tom, for always believing that there was good in him. From that day on, Reginald's outlook on life changed. He had always believed in the power of love and understanding, but now he had seen firsthand just how much it could transform a person, and he was grateful for the experience despite the pain it had caused him. He continued to see patients, helping them work through their own struggles and finding new meaning in loving his neighbors. And he never forgot about Tom, who had opened his heart and taught him a valuable lesson about the preciousness of life and the power of love.
Humphrey's Hopeless Plight by Thomas Miller. Humphrey Slum had nothing left to live for, not even hope. His friends had all tried in vain to help, but their efforts were ineffectual. No one could save him from what was coming. In the deepening dark of the night, he felt like a cornered animal, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. He had reached the end of the line, and the future held only pain and misery. He went to his old writing desk and sat down with a heavy heart. He knew deep down that his time was limited, and he wanted to leave some record of his passing, some small mark that he had existed. With trembling fingers, he wrote the words of a suicide note, pouring out his heart and soul into the paper. The note was filled with anguish and despair, a testament to the bleakness of his life, and the sorrow he felt at leaving everything behind. But at the same time, it was also a declaration of his freedom. For, in death, he would no longer be subjected to the cruelties of his oppressors, and he would find peace. He finished the note and sealed it with a wax seal. Then he went to the kitchen and filled a basin with cold water. He washed his face and looked in the mirror. His reflection stared back at him, hollow and sad. He returned to his desk and gazed at the suicide note. He thought about all the people who had come and gone in his life, and at all the strange twists and turns of fate that had led him to this point. He thought of the people he had loved and the things he had done. He thought of the future he had been denied and the present he was about to lose. And then he thought of redemption. He remembered suddenly the power of the human spirit, and he felt himself stirred with a sudden hope. He wanted to believe that, even in death, there was a chance for a new beginning. With a deep breath, he stood and shook off the shackles of his despair. His course was set and he was ready. He walked out of his room and into the night a free man.
Dark Vatican Dinner by Thomas Miller. The evening was grim and gloomy. The heavens were a vast blanket of darkness, and the air was filled with the smell of despair. Thomasson had arrived in Vatican City, invited to a special dinner by the Pope himself. He had been warned of the consequences if he refused the invitation. And so he had little choice but to accept. He arrived at the palace and was led into an opulent banquet hall with a sumptuous feast prepared for him. He was the only guest, a fact that did not escape his notice. He was served a rancid dinner, one that smelled and tasted like something from the depths of Hades. Nevertheless, Thomasson persevered and soon had consumed the entirety of the meal. Once the meal was finished, the Pope finally made his appearance. He was an imposing figure, his eyes blazing with a sinister light. He was clad in a richly embellished robe and wore a golden cross around his neck. Thomasson felt the Pope's gaze piercing his soul, and he trembled. The Pope declared in a booming voice, "My friend, I have invited you here tonight to discuss a matter of life and death. Tonight you shall face a choice that I have made for you. You shall choose either to live and serve me or die by my hand." Thomas was taken aback by the Pope's proclamation, and he felt a wave of fear wash over him. He had been set up, and he realized with dread that his life was in the hands of this powerful figure. He was tempted to refuse and plead for his life, yet the Pope's gaze was so overwhelming that he could not find the courage to do so. At last the Pope spoke. "My friend, I've chosen you for special tasks. I require your assistance in a matter of power, pleasure, and lust. If you accept, you shall be rewarded with a life of luxury, and you shall be free of all worry and fear. If you refuse, I shall have no choice but to put an end to your life." Thomas Ming could not believe his ears. He had been lured into a trap, and the Pope was not going to let him go. He was filled with despair, and he felt a longing for his old life. He was tempted to refuse the Pope's request, but he knew it was futile. In the end, he accepted the Pope's offer, and he was given new clothes and a fine horse. The night air was cold and still. Thomas rode off into the darkness, not knowing where he was going or what lay ahead. He was filled with dread as he rode further and further away from the Pope's palace, yet he could not shake the feeling that something strange and sinister was afoot. The road seemed to go on forever, and Thomas Ming was filled with a sense of hopelessness. He had been betrayed, and he was now riding to his death. He could feel an eerie presence following him, something that seemed to be stalking him in the darkness. At last, the road came to an abrupt end. Before him was a castle, its towers reaching up into the night sky. A faint light shone from one of its windows, beckoning Thomas closer. As he approached, he saw a group of cloaked figures standing outside. They were the Pope's servants, and they greeted him with a sinister smile. Thomas knew he had been set up. He had been lured into a trap, and he was now at the mercy of the Pope's servants. The only thing he could do was to accept his fate, for he knew that if he refused to cooperate, they would kill him. And so he followed them into the castle. Inside, he found himself in an opulent hallway with dark tapestries and paintings adorning the walls. He was led down a long corridor and into a room filled with strange artifacts and devices. At the center of the room was a chair, and in it sat the Pope himself. He regarded Thomas with a cold stare, and he spoke in a low voice. "My friend, you have been chosen to serve me. You shall do my bidding, and you shall do it without question. If you refuse, you shall be put to death." Thomas, he could feel the despair rising in his chest, and he knew that he had been set up for his life that night. He was a mere pawn in the Pope's game, and he had no choice but to accept his fate. He nodded, and the Pope declared, "Your life is now in my hand."
When I was just 4 years old, my family and I moved to the small town of Shoreham, New York. It was a quaint little place with a population of only a few thousand people, but to me it was a whole new world waiting to be explored. My parents had decided to move here to be closer to my grandparents, who lived just a few streets away. I was excited to live in the same town as my grandparents, but little did I know that my short time in Shoreham would be filled with memories that would stay with me forever. One of the first things I did when we moved to Shoreham was explore our new neighborhood. I remember riding my bike down the streets, marveling at the rows of colorful houses and the beautiful gardens that lined the sidewalks. The streets were quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. It was a stark contrast from the bustling city we had come from, and I loved the peacefulness of it all. But what truly made Shoreham special to me were the friends I made. Being an only child, I was always looking for someone to play with and have adventures with. And I was lucky enough to find just that in my new neighborhood. I remember the first time I met my neighbor, Jay. He was a few years older than me, but he was the friendliest person I had ever met. We quickly became inseparable, and it wasn't long before we were spending every day together. Jay was a ball of energy, always coming up with new games and activities for us to do. We would ride our bikes around the neighborhood, have picnics in the park, and even build forts in his backyard. But my favorite thing to do with Jay was explore the woods behind our neighborhood. There was a small creek that ran through the woods, and we would spend hours catching tadpoles and looking for frogs. To me, those were some of the best days of my life. As the years went by, Jay and I grew even closer. We shared secrets, dreams, and fears with each other. I remember one summer when we were about 10 years old. We made a pact that we would always be best friends, no matter what. We even wrote it on a piece of paper and buried it under a big oak tree in the woods. It might seem silly to some, but to us, it meant everything. But as we got older, life started to change. My family moved away from Shoreham when I was 12, and although Jay and I promised us to stay in touch, we slowly drifted apart. We would exchange letters and phone calls at first, but as time went by, it became less and less frequent. It wasn't until I was in college that I lost contact with Jay completely. Years went by, and I often thought about Jay and our time together in Shoreham, but as life got busier, those memories started to fade, and I focused on making new ones. It wasn't until a few years ago, when I was combing through the internet, that I stumbled upon something that stopped me in my tracks. It was an article about a young man named Jay from Shoreham who had passed away at the young age of 22. My heart sank as I read the article, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I clicked on the picture, and as it loaded, my heart skipped a beat. It was Jay, the same bright smile, the same mischievous glint in his eye. Tears welled up in my eyes as I remembered all the memories we had shared together, but as I continued to read the article, something inside me shifted. I felt a numbness wash over me, and I couldn't quite explain it. I realized that I had never truly said goodbye to Jay. I had never properly grieved his loss. I thought about all the times I had seen him in my dreams, or the moments when I felt his presence, and it all made sense. Jay was still with me, in my heart and in my memories, and although he was no longer physically here, he would always hold a special place in my life. After reading the article, I reached out to Jay's family and attended his funeral. It was a bittersweet moment, as I saw many familiar faces from my childhood, but also sad to see that Jay was no longer with us. I shared stories with his family and friends, and it felt like we were back in Shoreham, playing in the woods and having the time of our lives. As I left Shoreham and returned to my own life, I couldn't help but reflect on how short life can be. Jay and I were only friends for a short time, but the impact he had on my life was immeasurable. I thought about all the adventures we had together, all the memories we shared, and I realized that he would always be a part of me. Years have passed since that day, and I still think about Jay often. I have kept the piece of paper with our pact buried under the oak tree, and every time I visit Shoreham, I make sure to pay a visit to our special spot in the woods. I have also made a conscious effort to stay in touch with my childhood friends, knowing that life is too short to lose touch with the people who have made a difference in our lives. In a way, Shoreham will always hold a special place in my heart because it was the place where I met Jay and made memories that would last a lifetime. And although it's been years since I lived there, I will always remember my time in Shoreham with fondness and nostalgia. It may have only been a short time, but the impact it had on my life is immeasurable, and I will forever be grateful for the memories I have of Jay, my dear friend from Shoreham.
Adam takes back his blessings by 8 News. Seen the interior of a serene Catholic church. Father Adam Burns is ready to start his sermon, looking composed and solemn. The pews are filled with diverse characters, including Adam the Woo, paging Mr. Morrow, and an individual resembling Alfred Hitchcock.
Good morning, my dear congregation. Today we come together to ponder the profound nature of our faith and...
Oh my God, look out, Father Byrne.
Suddenly, chaos ensues as a stray cat runs through the church, leading to a series of unfortunate events that culminate in Father Adam Burns being knocked unconscious by a wayward hymnal. Amidst the confusion, Adam the Woo rises to the occasion, albeit hesitantly stepping up to the pulpit in his explorer attire.
Well, everyone, it looks like it's up to me to fill in. Don't worry, I've got a wealth of unique experiences to share.
Paging, mister. Morrow watches with skepticism but remains silent, curious about what will unfold.
So, today's sermon will be about revoking blessings. Yes, you heard right. If you've received a blessing from me, consider it revoked.
The congregation exchanges confused glances, unsure of what to make of this proclamation.
That's not how blessings work. You can't just be an Indian giver with divine grace.
Alfred Hitchcock stands pulling out a director's clapperboard.
Enough. This production has gone far enough. Let's bring this to a graceful close, shall we?
As Hitchcock steps forward to end the service, the narrator, embodying the voice and demeanor of Robert Stack, suddenly intervenes. But just as order seemed to be restored, a pecan pie, seemingly from nowhere, flies through the air, aimed squarely at Adam the Woo. The pie makes its mark, leaving Adam the Woo knocked out cold, much to the shock and secret amusement of the congregation. In the aftermath, the congregation is left to ponder the bizarre turn of events while Alfred Hitchcock takes charge, ensuring Father Adam Burns is attended to and bringing the service to a close with dignity and a hint of mystery.
Let us remember, my friends, that faith, like film, thrives on the unexpected. Today's service, although unconventional, reminds us of the unpredictable nature of grace.
The scene fades to black as members of the congregation help Adam the Woo to his feet. Their expressions a mix of concern and suppressed laughter. The church, once a place of serene worship, now echoes with the reminder that faith and forgiveness are not so easily revoked or misunderstood.
My Love and the Darkness Within by Thomas Miller. Oh, my sweet Shannon, you lie there so still, as if rigor mortis claimed you, its unwilling victim. Your gaze fixed upon the ceiling, an enigma, leaving me to wonder at your final vision. The shock painted on your features suggests an end you never wished to meet, a story left untold. Oh, my dearest, the night wraps us in its youthful cloak, as we meander through the graveyard's silent tales. Here, souls once vibrant with love and joy now lie stiff and somber under the moon's pale gaze. Their stories are etched in stone, a testament to what was, a haunting melody of life's fleeting dance. In the stillness, I hear the whispers of the graves, the soft wailing of the corpses longing for release. They speak of loneliness, a solitude enforced, as the world moves on, leaving them to slumber in peace. The families are gone, the memories fading into night, yet here we walk among the shadows of their plight. Your silent form beside me, a ghostly companion, reflects the darkness within, a sorrow unspoken. In this garden of the departed, our love finds a strange echo, a bond that transcends the boundary of life and death. Together we explore this liminal space, where love and loss intertwine in an eternal embrace. Oh, my sweet Shannon, in this realm of shadows, our hearts navigate the mysteries of the beyond. Though you lie in silence, your spirit whispers to mine, guiding me through the darkness, a beacon of love divine. In this moment between the worlds we find our truth, a love that endures, unyielding, in the face of the night's uncouth.
And with each one, Doctor Chambers grew stronger, his hold over the hospice centre solidifying. The staff watched in horror as patient after patient died under Dr. Chambers' care, but they were afraid to speak out, afraid of what he might do to them if they dared to question his methods. But there was one person who was not afraid. Nurse Anna had been working at the hospice for years, and she had seen the changes that had taken place since Dr. Chambers had arrived. She knew something was not right, and she was determined to find out what. She followed Dr. Chambers as he made his rounds, taking note of his interactions with the patients. She saw the contracts, the way he spoke to them, the fear in their eyes. But she also noticed something else. Every time Dr.
Beneath the gentle sweep of a weeping willow's embrace, two souls found solace upon a weathered park bench. Their love and unspoken melody resonated in the quietude of the afternoon. Fingers intertwined, their bodies nestled close, an unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of shared moments. The touch of their shoulders, tender and warm, painted an enchanting tableau of devotion. Their gazes, like intertwined constellations, spoke volumes that words dared not utter. The bench became their vessel, sailing through memories both old and newly made. They reveled in the mundane magic of sharing stolen glances and heartfelt laughter. With the symphony of nature as their backdrop, they composed a love story that defied the limitations of language.
My Love and the Darkness Within by Thomas Miller. Oh, my sweet Shannon, you lie there so still, as if rigor mortis claimed you, its unwilling victim. Your gaze fixed upon the ceiling, an enigma, leaving me to wonder at your final vision. The shock painted on your features suggests an end you never wished to meet, a story left untold. Oh, my dearest, the night wraps us in its youthful cloak, as we meander through the graveyard's silent tales. Here, souls once vibrant with love and joy now lie stiff and somber under the moon's pale gaze. Their stories are etched in stone, a testament to what was, a haunting melody of life's fleeting dance. In the stillness, I hear the whispers of the graves, the soft wailing of the corpses longing for release. They speak of loneliness, a solitude enforced, as the world moves on, leaving them to slumber in peace. The families are gone, the memories fading into night, yet here we walk among the shadows of their plight. Your silent form beside me, a ghostly companion, reflects the darkness within, a sorrow unspoken. In this garden of the departed, our love finds a strange echo, a bond that transcends the boundary of life and death. Together we explore this liminal space, where love and loss intertwine in an eternal embrace. Oh, my sweet Shannon, in this realm of shadows, our hearts navigate the mysteries of the beyond. Though you lie in silence, your spirit whispers to mine, guiding me through the darkness, a beacon of love divine. In this moment between the worlds we find our truth, a love that endures, unyielding, in the face of the night's uncouth.
The story of Abacus Cronell Blooming Field by Thomas Miller. In the golden heart of a bustling city that thrived on oil and opulence, Abacus Cronell Blooming Field carved his empire. His name was synonymous with wealth and power, a titan among men in the oil industry. Apis, with his keen eye for business and relentless drive, transformed the Bloomingfield name into a beacon of success. Yet, beneath the glittering surface of prosperity lay a labyrinth of personal turmoil and estrangement. As the years passed, Abacus grew increasingly detached from his family. His relentless pursuit of wealth had created a chasm between him and his loved ones, a chasm deepened by misunderstandings and neglected relationships. The dinner table, once a place of laughter and shared stories, became a silent battlefield of unspoken grievances and buried resentments. Apicus's wife, Eleanor, and their 2 children, Charles and Eliza, longed for a sliver of his time and affection, but the oil tycoon was too consumed by his empire to notice the growing rift. His heart, once tender and full of love, had hardened like the steel of his derricks. Tragedy struck on a cold winter night. A devastating fire claimed the ancestral Bloomingfield mansion, taking with it Eleanor, Charles, and Eliza. Abacus was left to face the smouldering ruins of his home, and the empire he had built stood as a mocking testament to the cost of his neglect. In the depths of his despair, Abacus encountered Helena, a woman whose warmth and compassion pierced through the veil of his grief. She was unlike anyone he'd ever known, a beacon of light guiding him through his darkest hour. Helena's presence brought a semblance of peace to Abacus's tormented soul, and in her he found an unexpected chance at redemption. Through Helena's eyes, Abacus saw the world anew. She taught him the value of simplicity, the beauty of a shared meal, and the joy of a heartfelt conversation. Helena's love was unconditional, a balm to his scarred heart. In her embrace, Abacus discovered the truths he had long ignored, that wealth and success paled in comparison to the riches of love and companionship. However, as Abacus opened his heart to Helena, he was haunted by the shadows of his past. The guilt of neglecting his family weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the love he had taken for granted. Abacus realized that love, once lost, leaves a void that no amount of wealth